Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. It's such a beautiful day today. I think we lucked out. It's not 90 and it's not 40. Our program this evening was made possible by the South Dakota Humanities Council, which is an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We ask that you please take the opportunity to fill out one of the evaluation forms so that we can submit those back to the Humanities Council, and they use that information to help formulate next year's selection. If you don't have one, we do have them in the back, and we have some pens back there too. Hopefully everyone has returned to their book by this evening. We will be taking those back to Brookings so that others across the state of South Dakota will have the opportunity to read and enjoy this book and discuss it. I want to personally thank Jeff and Judy Little for their assistance with all of our electronics this year, which is kind of new and exciting to add to our One Book South Dakota event. I also want to personally thank Chandra, who works here in the church office, for all the many, many things she does to help me get some of these things up and running. I appreciate you, Chandra. Oh, and the one thing that's most exciting is Jeff is recording the event, and it will be posted probably sometime tomorrow on the church's website, and we're thinking it'll probably be on the church's Facebook page and perhaps even YouTube, right, Judy?
I think so.
So if you have anybody that might be interested, just let them know that there will be lots of opportunities for them to see it there. And anybody, of course, that can't attend tonight, like Margaret Jones, for instance, she was so excited when she found out we were recording it because she lives at Dalrymple and they're still quarantined. So it's really great for that. We acknowledge the support of the South Dakota Humanities Council in providing our scholar for this evening's event. Lori Walsh is a graduate of Sioux Falls Lincoln High School and Augustana University's journalism program. She is a writer, a blogger, a book critic, a children's book writer, a photographer, and a poet. Lori also served in the United States Marine Corps for 6 years, working as a cryptologic Korean linguist. She worked as a freelance journalist for the Sioux Falls Argus Leader and is a humanities scholar for the South Dakota Humanities Council, leading veterans writing groups. Lori began with South Dakota Public Radio as the host of Dakota Midday. In January of 2017, that show was replaced by In the Moment, which she continues to host today. We are very honored to have you here again, Lori, and I think everyone will agree with me that it is a privilege for us to have you here to lead our discussion. So let's all give Lori a welcoming hand. We do have microphones. Lori, of course, has a microphone, and I have this microphone so that if anybody has questions, raise your hand, and I will bring the microphone around to you.
All right. Well, this is the first time I've been in this building since, February or March? And so I am personally thrilled to be back here. It looks lovely. So thank you for all the effort to make it safe so that we could do this and talk about this book, Unfollow. Megan Phelps Roper, the first interview she did with any reporters or journalists, I believe, was us at South Dakota Public Broadcasting when she came to the South Dakota Festival of Books in Deadwood last year. And it was the day before this book was published. And so she was going right after the show. We didn't think we were going to get her at the last minute because she had a national NPR interview she was doing. And I think we said at the time, this book is going to be a big deal. And I think we were all right. It was pretty obvious from the beginning that this would have a high interest level. Now, it's important to note that just about everybody who has left Westboro Baptist Church has written a book of some kind. But this one stands out for its literary merit, I think, as well as for its story. And Megan is a really strong storyteller and a strong and deep and thoughtful writer. So I think that's partially why this book has become maybe more iconic already in its first year of publication than some of the others that have come out of these family members who have left this church behind. So this is a discussion, so we have this microphone on a pole that Lynn's going to bring around when you have things to comment. My job is to facilitate this conversation, not just to do a presentation. But there are a couple things that I want to start with, and that is, I'm guessing that everyone here who has read the book, but if you are watching online, we are going to use some of the language in this book, which is pretty offensive and difficult to hear. So if anybody is not prepared to hear that language, so you probably should wave at me a little bit and we'll back off. I think it's important to say some of the words that this group of people said and to talk about what exactly that word choice means and what that word choice, how it lives on for people. So just from the very beginning, I'm on page 12 here, and she talks about the word fag and faggot immediately when she's talking about LGBTQ people. And the reason that they used this word was because it literally signified a bundle of sticks used for kindling. Fag is an elegant metaphor, her grandfather insisted. In the same way a literal fag is used to kindle the fires of nature, these metaphorical fags fuel the flames of hell and the fire of God's wrath. Of course, fag also had the added benefit of being scandalous and offensive, which only garnered more attention to our message. So that's really the word that's going to be, and this word is applied to LGBTQ people, it's applied to the United States of America, it's applied to, in their, some of their signs say your rabbi is a whore. It's applied to a lot of different people other than where you might think that, originally it was the label applied to. So let's talk about that language. It can't be the first time everybody has heard this. And one of the first questions I have for you is one of the things that Megan, as she writes this book, really sets up is how counterculture this church was. And I have some questions about that, because it's not necessarily counterculture to say hateful things about gay people back when this was happening or today. But there's a narrative that's sort of creative about how important it is that they are speaking God's only truth and God's only word. And so I thought I would start with that. Did you have impressions of that when you heard this story? Did you know about the Westboro Baptist Church? Who wants to kind of kick us off with some of what you knew before you read this book? We're just going to wander around and put a pole in your face pretty soon.
The information that I had or that I knew about the church was more on the funerals that they protested at, because my brother-in-law was part of the Patriot Guard that rode the motorcycle. He lived in northern Minnesota at the time, and there was a group of people that rode the motorcycles to the site of a soldier, making a ring around the family to protect them from the group that was protesting. And so that's how I first heard about the Westboro Baptist Church, and then just reading the book, I didn't realize it was quite as bad as it was.
They're really, really good at getting attention. They're really good at getting media attention. Go ahead.
Family. I didn't realize it was a whole family. I thought it was just all kinds of, but it was like everybody in the church was the same family. That
Yeah.
was really eye-opening.
Yeah, almost entirely made up of one, of an extended family.
But almost like a cult, you know?
Yeah, and I think we'll get into that. What does abuse do to people? What does indoctrination do to people? But to Linda's point, I think that's Linda behind. To Linda's point, I don't know that they got the national attention that they did until the protests of military funerals. And that brings us back to what I'm wondering about the original protests against gay people, against LGBTQ people. Did the world care as much about that as they cared? When I talked to Megan in the interview, about 2/3 through, maybe almost to the end of it was a very powerful kind of thing, because I just said to her, there's no secret my brother's gay, and that I'm a veteran, and that your words, you're holding a sign that has damaged my family, that has damaged people physically with, beatings and bruises, but also emotionally and psychologically. And she said, I did know that. She had done her research, and she said the thing she regretted most was protesting the funeral. She has a hard time getting past that. And my thought at the time was, really? That? What about this other thing that I just told you? So we had this moment of kind of reconciliation and forgiveness and grace and patience and all these things I think were so important in a conversation. But yet a year later, I'm still thinking about that. I'm still thinking why fags didn't keep her up at night, but troops did. Why is one more valued by her or by this country? And I didn't ask her a follow-up question, so I don't know, what she really values, and she's not here to speak to that. But that was something that I've struggled with this book, I'll be honest, from the get-go. And the first question I asked her was, this book is called Loving and Leaving the Church. She loves these people. This is her family. These are the people who tucked her in at night. She loves them. And I want to talk a little bit about empathy and where it should be placed. Are we empathetic toward Megan? Are we empathetic toward the people at the funeral? Where does our empathy lie? Do we have enough empathy to go around for everybody in this situation? Did anybody else have thoughts they wanted to share on that theme of where is empathy placed effectively and where is empathy misplaced? And how do we approach somebody who is seeking forgiveness for something that still hurts so much?
Well, not so much that, but what struck me reading it is these children were indoctrinated from little on, and that's how they developed their empathies, their thought patterns, their loyalties. So we really need to be careful in what we say to children, how we nurture our children, grandchildren, just those we come in contact with, that we don't create something like this cult, unintentionally.
You really this is intentional, but yes, what are we doing unintentionally? This is a very intentional indoctrination with her grandfather at this point. This is what he wants. What does he want? What does Fred Phelps want? Judy wants You can maybe shout it out if you want.
Well, I was astounded by the literacy of how the Bible was taught. And having been going to church all of my life, I read some verses I've never ever read before and thought, where in the heck did that come from? And I think Kathy is the one who pointed out, did you notice that she didn't write where they came from necessarily?
She didn't what?
But they,
She didn't write where they came from. Judy's saying there was verses in here that, yeah.
chapter, what verse?
Yeah.
But I was just astounded with how literally they took every word of the Bible. And it's like, if you truly believe that, then you really, that is a very literal translation. But I think they were so far off. That's the part that just really puzzled me.
It's a little frightening to see a verse. And let's start with Esau and Jacob. Because that's where, I mean, this begins in Genesis, and this idea of one of these brothers being created for God to love and the other being created to burn in hell. He is created to be despised. And Megan spends much of her life fearing that she is like Esau. He had been created to be condemned to hellfire, all through no fault or cause of his own. For the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. And you're right, there's no chapter, verse, version, annotated Bible section to reference that in this book. She doesn't have an index or, it's not a scholarly work. It's, a memory of what she was taught. I remember Jacob and Esau in school, in Sunday school. I don't remember that. How do we feel about this? About taking things from the Bible and using them for this kind of self-loathing and fatalism, determination. She mentions Calvin in this book. We're all pretty familiar with Calvin and predestination in the Presbyterian Church. It looks very different in these walls. Have you ever had an experience where the Bible has been used in your life to something that you just knew wasn't right? Tacey?
This book was full of those things, but I was so, shocked by all these things that were so violent she shared, like especially when you got towards the end. And I thought I knew the Bible pretty well, being in so many Bible studies, but I'd never heard that story at the end of Judges. She talks about when, this man cut up his wife and then strew all her remains in all those different locations. Now, I don't know how she related that. I can't remember what the context was, why she shared that, but I was just shocked. And then, when you were talking earlier about the father, or the grandfather, who started this, again, it was so interesting. How the whole family, every one of them had gone to law school and had law degrees and argued even at the Supreme Court level. And the fact that her grandfather had gotten that award for civil rights, defending, the black people, at that time. It just seemed kind of ironic, because they were probably a lot of prejudice at that time, but he defended them. And then, the thing about the GLBT, it just didn't make sense.
Which goes back to this big question, what does Fred Phelps want? And when we know this about him, when we see his full life arc by the end of the book, we learn different things about him. At this time, when he is preaching these things to his family, what does he want? What is he after here? Control? Obedience? Domination? Attention? It's not truth. I don't see how we could argue that he's after truth in anywhere. Knowing how he uses Scripture to get obedience from the people around him, I think it would be a hard stretch to say that he ever had any intention of seeking truth in this book, in his faith, with his family, in society. I don't believe him if he says, I'm skeptical that he was ever after any notion of truth. I think he's after loyalty and obedience and an incredible amount of control over people's lives. Power, yeah. And to be he wants to be right, yeah.
They were the ones that had what everybody else didn't have,
Yeah.
basically. You know, he was saying, okay, we have the real, you know, whatever, as far as the scripture, and, you know, we know what's right, and the rest of you are all going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, you know, because they persecuted, you know, the funerals, the LBG, you know, and then even the Jewish people,
Right.
and, you know, some of that in between there. And it's like, when I first started reading and I got a little bit into it, I'm like, I'm really thankful that I have the knowledge that I have, because I think it'd be really hard to read it if you didn't have some of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for a person that really was kind of floundering themselves, you know, to start reading that and going, my goodness, what is this? You know?
Right.
And, you know, you see how people are taken into cults, and how this really, you know, I mean, it was a family thing. You know, how people could be indoctrinated into that. I mean, because they started with the kids while she was what, 5?
Yeah.
And she's out on the
Yeah,
picket line.
she's 5 and her favorite sign, yeah, is the God hates fags sign, which is their. I want to find this part. Let me find this for a minute, where she kind of goes through this litany. And when you say, you know, service members and, you know, Princess Diana's in there. Yeah. Similar scenes played out following every death that caught my grandfather's attention. Everyone from Matthew Shepard, his lying fag friends can't help him now, Mr. Rogers, Sissy Pied Piper from hell. Day after day, month after month, year after year, I took in the gleeful reactions that Gramps modeled until they became my own. On the morning of 9/11, there was only a split second between a classmate's frantic announcement of the attacks and my genuine excitement and glee at the demise of those evil people. I knew my lines. When the mayor of New York announced, "We will rebuild," my memory called up the verse, "We will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I shall throw down." And one of the things I wondered is, like, you know, Princess Diana, Fred Rogers, Matthew Shepard, 9/11, first responders. I mean, like, which one makes you the like, at what point are you like, oh my, they can't say that about Mr. Rogers, you know? And then you're thinking, well, wait a minute, can they say that about Matthew Shepard? Can they say that about Princess Diana? Like, it's so all-inclusive in its hatred that we almost become numb to, oh, that's just another, like, at what point do we lose our indignation at this man's willingness to call up hatred on someone else? Which is an interesting thought in this day and age when we're bombarded by spite and ire and gunk in the daily news feeds and a political election. At what point are we just okay with whatever has been said because, well, the other guy said this, or everybody, you know, is corrupt in Washington or whatever? Like, are we desensitized at some point to this? Go ahead.
I just think it's interesting the way the monster and the hatred that he created turned on him. And eventually he was a victim of the very thing he created. You know, you just have to wonder what was going through his mind then.
Right.
Did he see the light then and ask himself, what have I done?
Yeah. Is there some kind of reckoning, reconciliation? What happens when how does it take over someone's heart? And somebody mentioned earlier just about the child abuse that's in this book, the psychological abuse, the indoctrination. There are physical beatings, there are, threats, there are some deeply. Does anybody have experience working with people who have survived trauma, who can speak to anything that you read in this book as sounding familiar to the work that you do professionally? Anybody have that in their background. Because sometimes it's hard. One of the things when I was getting ready to interview Megan, because I was the first person to interview her, and I wasn't sure what my responsibility was as a journalist. And I was like, at some point you have to hold somebody accountable for some of the things that they've done and said, and you have to poke holes in some of the stories. And remember, Megan Phelps-Roper is a debater, and and so she's also come up from this highly polished and prepared background. And I gotta tell you, she came up to shake my hand before the interview, and I've never looked in the eye of anyone who was so broken. And if that's an act, I'm not going to be the one to say it is, because it looked totally authentic to me. She looked like if I went like this, she would have fallen over. And she had her little child. It was the child's first birthday, I think, that day. Her husband was there, and they live in South Dakota. And there was something that was like, man, I can't ask her anything hard. She's going to fall apart. And she didn't. She was patient, and she was thoughtful. And I liked her, but there's much about this book that I don't like to be reading and be a part of. Judy?
But we were, how lucky we were to have the favor of God.
How lucky we were to have the favor of God. Do we fall into this? Yeah, but do we fall into this? I mean, do we fall into this as Christians, as people of faith, as Presbyterians? Like, do you personally ever fall into this, like, well, at least I know the truth. At least I know this. And yeah, I've been in Bible studies with people in this congregation where we talk about the sheep and the goats, and they were like, don't worry, you're a sheep. And I'm like, what does that even mean? I don't know what that means. And when you see it taken to an extreme of control and hatred, I think it should make everybody pause a little bit and think deeply about how you read Scripture, how you talk about God, when you were wrong. Have you ever been wrong? In your faith, have you ever thought one thing and then woke up one day and was like, I never read this chapter? You know, like I was looking here and I wasn't looking at this because I just... It's not black. It's the Christian Bible is not an easy text to... They have a very black and white life, is what she said. They just have a very, they want that to be so crystal clear and so black and white, and that sort of that comes back and eats many of them. What does Megan want by writing this book?
Be forgiven for her actions, maybe?
To be
Understood and heard.
By us, by the world, by her family.
I think more by the world than her family, because they're not going to buy into this. And I wonder, how is she doing now? You saw a very damaged person. That was a year ago. Does she get stronger as she's married to this nice man from Clark and being a mother? And what kind of mothering does she do?
Maybe we just all need a nice man from Clark.
There you go.
We need a nice South Dakotan to help us.
Nice South Dakota lawyer.
A nice friend, a nice man, a nice, from Clark.
But I mean, she learned her parenting from that whole cult, and maybe you're going to talk about that later. Is it a cult? It certainly seems like it. And how does she transform herself into the person she wants to be instead of that? That's a hard job, I would think.
I asked her in the interview about that in the sense that she doesn't have to speak out. Like, she could marry someone from South Dakota, change her name, and pretend that she's someone else. And I don't know that anybody would blame her for that, and then just saying, I've walked away from this life. She doesn't have to do this. And she doesn't have to go on tour, and she doesn't have to meet people like me who ask her hard questions, and she doesn't have to do any of this. And I mean, I guess you could say she makes money off the book, but I think she's capable of making money in many ways. So I don't think it's financially motivated. Nor is she probably going to, make $1 million off this book. I guess I don't know. But what does she want? And one of the things I wonder as I read this, because there is a line in here where she says, all I ever wanted was to understand and to be understood. And so I wonder if this is her redemption, but if this is also not written for her family. She very much wants a relationship with her family. I don't think that she wants to walk away. Who does? I mean, who really wants, even if your family is awful, don't you kind of want your family still? And I think she wants them to read. She knows they're going to read this. And she wants to explain to them. And when I asked her why she didn't just be quiet and go away, she talked about being at a dinner with a rabbi who said, you're basically, I'm going to paraphrase, your family gave you the courage to do what you're doing now. This is the most Westboro Baptist Church thing you could have done by casting aside everything that you were raised to believe and standing up and saying something entirely different. That's what they raised you to do. And I said, they gave you the courage and you decided how to use it? And she said, yeah, that. So this is a very courageous thing for her to do, but it's a very Westboro Baptist thing for her to do. No.
Oh, she has a TED Talk that's really good, and I forget when she did that, maybe it was after this, but I think it's to kind of fit into what our world is doing right now too. Like, people reached out to her and kind of challenged her in gentle ways, and it kind of made her start to change. And I think it's just, I thought the TED Talk kind of aligned with what's going on in our nation right now, and just kind of the humanistic view and things.
There is a question in the discussion guide about that. So in her TED Talk, she suggests 4 actions that make real conversation possible. Don't assume bad intent, ask questions, stay calm, and make the argument. And the question in the Reader's Guide from the Humanities Council is, do any of these suggestions seem especially useful to you? Do any seem especially challenging? So don't assume bad intent, stay calm, ask questions, and make the argument. So let's talk about what's happening in our world today, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the election, whether it's systemic racism, whatever, pick your poison in America in 2020. There's not a lot of this happening. There's not a lot of listening, asking questions, not assuming bad intent going on. I mean, we try to do this every day on the show that I host. Every day, and every day I tell you what, it's a challenge. It's a challenge not to assume bad intent for some things. And today, going back to the funeral protests, we were talking about this article in the Atlantic where President Trump says to unnamed sources, there's no named sources in the article. Jeffrey Goldberg is the writer, he's the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine. And he says this is what, the sources that he stands by say the president said this about American service members. And we're talking on the show about it. What does that mean for the election? What about the timing of the article? What about Bob Woodward's book? Just kind of looking at this meta politics kind of thing. And I just started getting mad, I couldn't help it. And the political science professor was like, well, we don't know if he said this. And I'm like, do you understand what happened at Bella Wood? I mean, these Marines that are in the ground at this cemetery that the president is calling suckers, do you understand what happened at this battle in 1918 and what they went through and the human endurance and how they stood their ground and kept the German army, machine guns and mustard gas and all these things. And once again, well, did he even say that? What was his intent? It's hard not to get emotional about the things that you're passionate about and not want to be understood, that's just wrong. It's just wrong to say those people are suckers. Well, have we lost all sense of of sacredness, and, almost had to be reminded, well, hold up, like, what do we know? How do we know it? What do we not really know? And how do we come together at this point? It's hard not to get angry.
Is what she's saying that if you see a group of people protesting at a soldier's funeral with disparaging signs, that you're not supposed to assume bad intent about the people who are protesting?
I didn't watch the TED Talk, so if anybody knows from the TED Talk what she specifically means by bad intent, what she said in my interview and what she says in this book is everyone who reacted hatefully toward them, who attacked them, who kicked their signs, who spit on them, who arrested them, everyone who smeared them on the internet, that only validated what she thought about the world. When she was in this echo chamber and everybody was, you're awful, that was what she expected to see. And it wasn't until somebody on the other side of her bubble was kind and compassionate and treated her like an intelligent person who was educated and was with the questioning, that was the time when she started changing her mind.
It wasn't like hateful or like it was the rabbi or her future husband. I'm trying to think of who else it was, but it was through Twitter, right? It was the
Twitter.
questioning. Yeah, so you wonder too, if there wasn't social media, would she still be in her cult? Because I think that really played a huge role of breaking her down a bit.
You guys, Twitter did something good.
Yeah. Yeah.
What? No.
Yeah, because it's just like they treated it, it's just this humanistic view. I think that everybody's a human, and
Right.
and that's kind of her religion now. When she talked about not really having a religion, she's a humanist. Yeah. No.
And she's arguing that she did not have bad intent. And so that, she's saying, like, I was doing these things that were horrible. And my family has done, she used the word evil. My family has done these evil things, but they're not evil people, and their intentions were not evil. So for her, she's like, if you think that they're just, being evil on purpose, then you miss an opportunity. I'm putting words in her mouth there a little bit, but you miss an opportunity to bring somebody to a better, more compassionate, more loving place, because that's what happened to her.
I would argue that if we're going to tackle things like systemic racism, that there needs to be more people who say, what we just witnessed is wrong. And so I don't know if that's assuming bad intent. I think you can call out evil or injustice and still be calm and do those other things that she recommended, being calm, and what were the other two?
Asking questions.
Ask questions.
Make an argument. Don't assume bad intent.
Yes, but I think there needs to be more people who not necessarily assume bad intent, but when they see things that are unjust, to have the courage to call it out.
And stay calm was the fourth
Stay
one.
calm.
She's an incredibly calm person.
Yep.
What do we think about that in the realm of when things are so bad and, you're watching another person from your neighborhood get gunned down in the street? We want you to be calm for how long? How long are we expecting people to be calm? How long are we expecting the motorcycle riders or the veterans or whoever to be calm about the fact? I'm a First Amendment girl. I love my First Amendment. But this is what the First Amendment looks like, and it is messy as.
This just occurred to me because my other book club discussed this yesterday, and everybody pretty much said they were afraid to, I shouldn't use the word confront, but they were afraid to nudge people they disagreed with. They were just afraid. You don't know who's got a gun anymore. And so we kind of talked about that, and as I'm thinking of what Lori's saying, now that the NFL, it used to be just Colin Kaepernick, and that would be really tough to be the only one, but when you have friends, teammates, people who are standing with you, it's easier to stand up to that bullying and racism, whatever it is, and stand together. So maybe that's the important part, is having people with beliefs that you have and being able to support each other and be calm about it and try to do things in a positive way. But then the minute you get into a protest, you don't know who's going to act in a bad way. And you don't want to be associated with that. So really knowing who you're standing with, I guess.
Anybody else have thoughts on this notion of, is calm a luxury? Is calm a privilege? Linda, you're doing so awesome. We're going to hire you at SDPV and you can come around with us.
I just think that we've lost calm. I used to be a pretty calm person and not get excited about politics and everything, and I'm angry all the time now. I'm angry when I go into a store and people aren't wearing their masks. I'm angry when I hear things on the news. I wake up angry, I go to bed angry, I don't like what I've become. I've lost calm. I don't know who to blame it on. I need to step back, but I don't know. I think a lot of us have lost that. I think we're just gotten to the point where can't handle it anymore. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
And calm is very hard work.
Calm is very hard work. I'm not sure I agree with, I'm not sure that, I'm not saying I disagree with her, I'm not saying I agree, I'm not sure how I feel right now about perpetual patience and calm. It might be beyond my reach. When my brother died and we were going up to Minneapolis, I'll be honest, Minneapolis was on fire and we're like, can we even get to him? And, it was the last weekend before we didn't know at the time, but we knew he was dying. And I was like, that's about right. It should be on fire. The world should be ending right now. And watching some of it was an outer expression of how I felt at that moment. That's how much rage was inside me and how angry I was. I didn't throw a brick. I didn't go out and protest. I peacefully drove my car to go see my brother, but inside I was angry every single day. And some days I wake up and I'm still angry about losing my brother. And people lose brothers, right? Like that happens to everybody. That's a pretty common kind of thing, and I'm that mad. When you look out and this is happening in your neighborhood or to your people or to your country or to, I don't know about calm. I don't know. I want to be calm. I have been taught to be calm. I have been taught to be a calm, gentle, conversational, listening woman. So has Megan. She's been taught to be calm. How many of us were taught not to be angry? We don't even know what to do with it anymore. We don't even know what to do with the anger because we were told we weren't supposed to be angry.
But Jesus was angry at the money changers. So there is a time and place for anger.
Say it again.
I said Jesus was angry at the money changers. I think there's a time and place to be angry and to speak up, and like they're saying, we're not going to take this anymore.
This is Jean, I think, mentioned, being afraid of confronting people because we don't know what kind of violence is waiting. And we talk a lot about the Second Amendment in this country. This is a book about the First Amendment in a lot of ways. This is a book about the damage that is done because of the First Amendment in this country, which I fully support, the First Amendment. Let me reiterate. But here it is. They can't go to Sweden because they're going to get arrested for the things they're saying about the King of Sweden, right? But they can do it right here in America, and their words can go all over the world. And it's, if we expect people to think about the Second Amendment in nuanced ways, we have to also think about the First Amendment in nuanced ways, and vice versa. So what are we doing with it? What is our personal responsibility with our words and our language and the things that we say and do? Where do we draw our own personal lines? And what's our intention? Are we intending to be dominant? Are we intending to be right? Are we intending to make the world a better place? What is our intention? And does that intention matter? Do you think people leave the church because of someone said, she's a humanist now? I have another friend who was raised in a cult with her father who raped her while he said the Lord's Prayer. And she has no love for anything. She will not walk into a church. And one of the questions of this book, I think, is when we go out into the world and we say we're the visible face of Christ, or that we're Christians, or we talk about our faith to some people, that is a trigger for obedience and control and violence and unspeakable acts. How do we handle that as people of faith? Do we have a responsibility to do something in that, or is that happening over here? That's not us, so therefore it doesn't affect us.
Well, first of all, I think you have to start where they're at. So in her case, she was very broken. And so, the couple that they stayed with in Deadwood, just kind of, they didn't preach at her, they didn't, do any of those kinds of things. They just loved on her, basically, included her in their family and just let her come to some grips on her own. I mean, she's probably got some part to go yet, but I think sometimes we just expect people that are in that oh, this is a magic bullet, and we're going to love you, and we're Christian, and it's just going to turn them around. Well, I think it takes a lot more than that, to do that. I mean, I think that's a good starting point, but I think we have to look at where have they been, and what are they. Well, because she had ideas on what it was going to be like after she left. Nobody's going to be there for me. Who am I going to relate to? Because I'm leaving my family behind. There's nobody here but my sister and myself. And she found out that wasn't the case. But I think we have to start where people are at and kind of figure out, how do we help them? How do we, love them, or maybe it's just listening or taking them out for a cup of coffee, or sometimes it's not all the big things, it's the smaller things. And people sometimes just want to be listened to, that nobody's ever let them talk about where they've been and what kind of experience they've had. We have a thing going on at our church last night, and we're doing a thing on racism right now with several other churches. And one of the ladies that was there was a black woman, and she said she started telling this other woman some of the experiences she had been going through as a black person in her younger years and all this kind of stuff. And the woman just said, "Oh, I don't believe that you experienced that." Well, that's really not validating what this woman was, she was trying to say. Yes, I have been through this. And unless you've had that experience, you can't understand it. And I think, what she was talking about, she just wanted to be understood. So I think we have to start with where they're at and go from there.
Yeah. We hear you, we believe you, we validate, actively being invalidated for a life experience that you've had is part of the problem, right? And everybody knows how that feels to a certain extent in your life. Everybody's had a shadow of telling people something that you feel or has had happen to you, and have someone else say, you're overreacting, or no, I don't believe it, or that can't be possible, or it wasn't that bad. It always surprises me that people can't come up with the imagination of empathy when that's such a human experience. And I think it's cognitive dissonance. We don't want to think that we live in a country like that. We don't want to think that we have a church like that. We don't want to think that we're people like that. And so we tell ourselves, not here, not us, not anymore. And that's, well, it's just wrong. And it's also a missed opportunity to make a change. But let's talk about the actions, because one of the other things that happens a lot, I know in my line of work, is something will happen and we'll bring people onto the show and we'll talk about this thing and what it means and why it's happening, and I'll always say, well, what do we do? Like, what's the first step? And I think 90% of the time people say we have to talk about it. We have to have an open, honest conversation. So 2 questions from that. One, why can't we do that? Why are we so afraid to confront one another about beliefs and listen and ask questions? And 2, well, that can't be the only thing we do. So what are the actions? And do those actions big, or are they small, or are they both? So let's start with being uncomfortable in conversations. Are people really afraid of getting shot, or are they really afraid of being uncomfortable? Would be the first thing that I would want to know. Like, do you really think that someone's going to take a violent action against you, or are you really just so not used to feeling icky in these conversations that you just don't want to be in that space because you want to be somewhere else?
And to a coworker the other day, I've seen more families split apart by political beliefs, recently than in my 32 years. And it's tragic, but it's just how divided we are right now. And so I think you don't want to spoil relationships over, religion or politics or those kind of things. So you kind of, you take it, or race, you tolerate it to a certain point because you don't want to spoil a relationship.
You don't want to be alone and abandoned, and who else is going to be there for you? And I think we're all actively trying not to create our own echo chambers too, because we're sort of aware that happens. So if you leave behind everybody in your life who is of a different political party than you, then you're just going to be in this little happy circle where everybody agrees with you, and everybody kind of knows that's not healthy. But yet, oh, it's so hard. How do we get beyond conversation? What are those actions? What do you tell these people who are leaving social worker about?
But I think it's tragic, I seriously talked to a woman last week that isn't talking to her daughter or her neighbors or her, I'm trying to remember if it was, her brother. I'm like, she has nobody, like she's angry, just like you said, but, and is she standing up for what she believes, but she doesn't have people around her, and so I don't have the answer to that. I don't know what it is, but it's sad.
Don't you think that part of the problem is because we are homogenous Midwesterners and we aren't used to having to confront different ideas or different people, and so it's very uncomfortable for us, I think. Yeah, Minnesota nice, yeah.
We're nice, and we want to believe that we're nice, too. It's not just that we are nice, it's that it's very important to us to have that identity as well, and finding out that somebody in our own neighborhood would feel the sting of racism on a daily basis. We don't want to. And I have one friend who posted one day that she was in the mall and they were following her, and all these white women popped up and were like, that happens to me, that happens to me too, that happens to me too. And I don't think that was helpful for what she was trying to express. But we really want it to not be true. We really want it to be not the case. And I don't know, I would be a hypocrite if I said I was talking to everyone in my family right now. So I got to reveal that before someone says, she stood there and she didn't tell us, Some of us are taking a break, a temporary break from having some of those tough conversations. And I think that's okay too. If it's a temporary break, to just say, you know what, I love you and I respect you. We cannot talk about this right now because it's just going to do more harm to us long term than good. Jean.
So what I said to my friends yesterday in this book club was, if you're afraid to nudge somebody else when they say something to you that you really think is wrong, then I said, start nudging yourself and hold yourself accountable. One of the things I really try, and it's very hard, because I do have strong opinions, is not to have a double standard. And if I'm going to criticize the other political party for something, then I have to hold my people accountable if they're doing the same thing. And instead of defending everything all the time and spinning it, because everybody spins everything. It's so stupid. You can argue both sides and they just spin it. But that's what I said to my group. I said, okay, if you're afraid to push somebody else, push yourself and make sure you're not using a double standard. It's hard, but we can try. And we can control ourselves.
Yeah. How do we hold our elected officials accountable from the party that we voted in or out? Whatever. I mean, whoever that person is that you admire and you want to be in whatever office you've decided, once you vote for them and they do something magnanimously stupid, are you on the phone to them, or are you just criticizing the other party for the magnanimously stupid thing that they have done? Because I don't think it's a political statement to say that clearly it's not working, and that we are all not holding people accountable for some of their behavior in a lot of different places, including ourselves.
I have a question about whether Megan said anything about her father, because there isn't much written in the book about her father.
She did not. I did not ask her. Her book is largely about her mother and the power and the influence that her mother had from the grandfather. She never brought her father up, and I didn't ask a question about her father. It's a good question. So we got two journalists working here now. There's always a question I didn't ask, But it's curious. What do we know about him? Not much.
I just think it's rather interesting that when she decided to leave, and her sister decided to leave, in the book anyway, it doesn't sound like it was like they tried to keep her from going. I mean, there was some of that, but I have heard from different people that have talked about cults and different things, when they try to leave, I mean, there's a real, trying to hold on to them. And according to the book, it didn't really sound like that. It was kind of like, okay, well, you're going, okay, pack your things and...
You're Esau, yeah.
Yeah.
We knew it all the time, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wondered, did she mention anything about that in detail at all?
I didn't ask her. As I read this book, one of the notes that I wrote was just like, the arrogance of this family is astonishing to me. Same thing with like going to public school. I did ask her about that. I'm like, you went to school? Like my stereotype of how this kind of family works is that you build a wall and you don't let in the internet and you don't let in. But they believe the opposite, which goes back to that sense of empathy. They believe they were right.
Right.
And that by giving you more information and asking hard questions and going to law school and having these deep conversations, that you would come to the truth. And the truth was that Westboro Baptist had the patent on that truth. And they, when it gets back to intent, that would be good evidence for the fact that they just believed they were right. And they're not going to force anybody to come, stay, go.
Well, I thought it was interesting, with the two of them and then with that couple too, that, it was just kind of, they ostracized them and, okay, it's like you're dead to us. You've been our daughter for all these years, and then all of a sudden, how do you just do that?
Yeah, I don't know. We are at our time. That always goes so fast. Anybody? Yes.
So does anybody know what's happening to the church? Is it the same 80 people? They're not in the news like they were. Are they still together?
Yeah, she has an interesting comment here that I marked where she says they had a symbiotic relationship with the press. And I know what she's saying. They gave attention to our message and we helped them sell newspapers and generate clicks. And I have a little bit of a skepticism for that comment because we don't cover stories so we can generate clicks. We cover stories because, it's an important story that needs the light shined on it. That's not to say every news organization doesn't have the same editorial guidelines. But I wonder if the noise of the world has gotten so big. They're still active. You can still go to their website and see what they're up to. I don't know the answer to that question. It's always good when we end with more questions than answers, right? That means it's been a good book discussion, and it's a good book to have a discussion about. Thank you to Jeff Little and Judy Little and Linda Rasmussen, first of all, for helping us work. And to whoever, the elders, the deacons, the church staff, all these people who are trying to figure out how to get us back into spaces safely. I just really appreciate that because this didn't have to happen at all. And it's just so nice to be here. Thank you.